My cigar.
Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski. We're doing a special project with my friend Curt Fields as Ulysses S. Grant. And we were just checking on his cigar placement. General Grant, there you go. It looks like a fine stogie. And I look forward to sitting down in your tent with you sometime and having a good smoke. So, Curt and I are working on a special project as part of a biography Curt is writing about Ulysses S. Grant for the Emerging Civil War series. And so Curt will be speaking to us today as Ulysses S. Grant, and we're going to focus today on events between the fall of Vicksburg and the fall of Chattanooga. General Grant, it's a pleasure to have you with us again.
It is good to be back with you again, Mr. Mackowski. And you find me here again in my tent. I seem to spend a lot of time in my tent on campaign. I have my frock coat on, though, that I usually have my sack. But we've been up Lookout Mountain earlier today taking some photos with my staff lined up on the mountain there where Hooker took the crest and of Lookout Mountain. So I still have my frock coat on, which is a bit unusual for me to wear. I usually wear the sack, but I thought for our meeting and talk that I'd just leave on my frock.
It's a beautiful view from up there at Lookout Mountain. I'm not sure that initially you'd expected to have that view right away, but events at Chattanooga unfolded in surprising fashion.
They did, and Hooker had been ordered to make a demonstration, but he went ahead and took Lookout Mountain. He didn't quite take the crest. He stopped at about 2 o'clock or so. The fog really set in. It began raining, very poor weather, and he thought, I'll give my troops a rest. But I think Carter Stevenson was in command of the Confederate forces, and they fell back down the mountain. They realized that the position was untenable. So, but I'll connect that series of events toward the end of our visit today. I would like to look back and reflect on where I was after the surrender at Vicksburg. I had twice I had sent telegrams to General Halleck that we should move on Mobile, Alabama. I had done so after Fort Donelson, and I had done so after Shiloh. And after Vicksburg, when I've got more than 80,000 troops there in the area, I proposed to General Halleck to move on Mobile, Alabama, because as I will speak of a bit later, Bragg was wanting to do his homeland campaign and get up into Kentucky and then into Ohio and do essentially the same thing that Lee was trying to do in the Eastern Theater and take the war to the Federals. He was not successful, as we'll see a bit later, but he's up in Middle Tennessee and Tullahoma and then falling back into Chattanooga with Rosecrans slowly, ever so slowly following him. And I proposed to General Halleck that if we move on Mobile, then we'll take a juggernaut from Vicksburg down through Mississippi, go through to Mobile, Alabama, and one of two things will happen. Either Bragg is going to have to pull back from southern central Tennessee, northwestern Georgia, around the Chattanooga area, or which will greatly relieve the pressure there in Tennessee and eliminate the Heartland campaign getting into Ohio by the Confederates, or I'm going to go to Mobile and wreak absolute havoc in Alabama, and in Mississippi, which are breadbaskets for Lee's army up in Virginia. And so one of two things is going to happen. But alas, General Halleck was more concerned with sending troops to the Trans-Mississippi across the Mississippi River into Texas and Louisiana and perhaps further west to keep Maximilian from sending troops out of Mexico into Texas and come in actively, belligerently in support of the Confederacy. It's somewhat, I think, in General Halleck's defense, I think that he was, to some extent, large perhaps extent, he was only doing what he thought President Lincoln wanted him to do. And President Lincoln had written me a letter explaining to me why we couldn't get troops from the Trans-Mississippi to go into Mobile and take the war to the Confederates. Well, instead of doing that, and I twice appealed to him to do it, he began parsing out my troops. I sent 5,000 troops to John Schofield in Missouri to counteract Sterling Price, who's moving and rattling sabers up in Missouri. It wound up in Helena, Arkansas, with those troops and to move against Sterling Price. I sent the Ninth Corps back to Burnside up in Kentucky. I sent 4,000 troops to Banks and Nathaniel Banks in Louisiana. Then I sent Ord and ELC Ord and the 13th Corps, because McClernand's long gone by now, down to Banks in preparation for moving into the Trans-Mississippi. I'd asked to go to New Orleans. And as my army is shrinking, I had, as I said a bit ago, I had a juggernaut there in Vicksburg. We cleaned out all within 100 miles of Vicksburg, much rebel activity, and there was little firecracker problems all over the area with partisans and guerrillas, but we had pretty much secured Mississippi. But and my army is shrinking. And I'd asked to go to New Orleans to talk with General Nathaniel Banks and was denied. But when I was ordered to send that 13th Corps with Ord to Banks, I then went to New Orleans because I was supposed to be in co-command or work with Banks and that. And of course, Banks outranks me. So I went to New Orleans to visit with him. I got there on September the 2nd. On September the 4th, we'd gone out to Carrollton to review the old 13th Corps, which had been stalwarts for me, worked hard in the Vicksburg campaign and siege. And I was riding a horse named Charlie, and I had described him as difficult to handle and hard to use. In fact, it took 2 men to hold him while I got on him. Well, we went out and reviewed the troops at Carrollton, and then coming back to New Orleans, something happened. Now, I must speak in vagaries here because I don't remember. And there are several different versions of what happened. Ultimately, the horse rears up and falls on me and caused a concussion and nearly crushed my left leg again. You'll remember in one of our earlier talks, horse fell on me at Shiloh on April the 4th and injured my left leg and ankle. Same leg here at Carrollton, Louisiana, going back into New Orleans. A train came by. Now, depending on who's talking about it, a train came by. The engineer recognized me, and he laid down on the whistle and spooked Charlie. Charlie reared and fell back on me. Someone else said that there was officer riding in front of me, and his horse turned and reared and ran over mine, and the horse actually ran over me. There's another version that my horse Charlie bolted and ran into a carriage and fell on me. So as difficult as it might be to believe, there's no really succinct and definitive story about what happened, except that the horse fell on me and knocked me unconscious. And one of the officers at the event said, "We thought he was dead." The horse got off of me. He got up. He was okay. I woke up a few days later in the Carrollton Hotel, and I was on my back for the next 20 days. I couldn't even roll myself over for the first few days. My left leg from knee to thigh was almost twice its size. All up under my left arm was injured and hurt. I had a concussion, a serious concussion, apparently. It addled my brains for a while. And I spent the next few days on my back and finally was able to sit up and read. I read Phoenixiana, a humoresque type book written by one of my classmates at West Point. And I had Sherman acting for me back in Vicksburg. He refused to take command. He said, I'll just pass along the paperwork and sign the orders. I don't want to cause a confusion in command. And that was all right with me. September the 16th, I got the first indication of maybe a problem in East Tennessee because General Halleck told me to send troops to East Tennessee. And I sent Sherman got him ready to go with a division. McPherson had already been sent across the river. I called back one of his divisions, contacted Stephen Hurlbut in Memphis and told him send 2 divisions. So we've got 4 divisions heading east. Not sure what's going on, but I didn't get the telegram until the message until the 23rd. And of course, as we know by now, the Battle of Chickamauga, the savagery that it was for 3 days, had already occurred, and Rosecrans was bottled up in Chattanooga. Now, to give our friends a little bit of background without getting into too much depth, Bragg had wanted in fall of 62, to do the Homeland campaign, Heartland, which I've already referenced. And Buell is moving very slowly with the Army of the Ohio and not engaging. And President Lincoln relieved General Buell of command and put General Rosecrans in command. And Buell was out of the war. Now, I would, if I have an opportunity, I will call Buell back into service if I had the opportunity. But he essentially went home. Rosecrans gets involved, and Bragg digs in the banks of the Stones River near Murfreesboro, which is 25 miles out of Nashville. Well, Rosecrans isn't moving much faster, but finally he sallies forth at the end of December, I think December 26th, and they fought the last 2 days of 1862, first day of 63. Pretty much a standstill, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. And I don't know why, Mr. Mackowski, but it doesn't seem to get its due of what happened at Stones River. But Bragg fell back to Tullahoma, just 35, 40 miles, as I recall, and dug in. And Rosecrans dug in, and they stayed that way for several months. Great frustration to the president and to myself too. I'm thinking, move. You're less than a day's march, 2 days march away. Engage him. But he finally began moving in the summer, and he outmaneuvered Bragg to his credit. Bragg falls back into Chattanooga, digs in at Chattanooga, and then in early September, Rosecrans again outmaneuvers him, makes Bragg think he's coming in north of Chattanooga, comes in south of Chattanooga. And much like what I did at Bruinsburg, Mississippi, he crossed the Tennessee River as I crossed the Mississippi without a shot being fired, as I crossed the Mississippi without a shot being fired. Very good maneuvering on Rosecrans' part. And Bragg abandons Chattanooga and falls back down into North Georgia, not far. And Rosecrans moves, and he's got his army in 3 different corps. And on September the 18th at Chickamauga Creek, Bragg begins to move against him. Now, Bragg has gotten some 15, 16,000 troops from Longstreet by now, because Longstreet has been sent to the Western Theater. As I understand, Jefferson Davis wanted to send Lee, but he managed to get out of that, and he sent Longstreet. So the Confederates sent a major force from the Eastern Theater to the Western Theater. Hooker is sent down to me in that campaign with 20,000 troops, which makes it, I think, unusual in the war. It's the only time that I know of in the war that there was a major contingent from Confederate and Federal that both came to the Western Theater, and then they both go back. However, they fought the Battle of Chickamauga, which was its second, I think, in dead and wounded only to Gettysburg. It's certainly the bloodiest battle in the Western Theater. It surpassed Shiloh. And Rosecrans goes back into Chattanooga and essentially into siege. George Thomas, to his credit, was the rear guard and kept Longstreet and Bragg from overrunning the Army of the Cumberland now, and named Ohio went away, the Army of the Cumberland, and they go into siege. Well, after all that dust cleared, the orders were for me to go and meet in late September, early October. I'm supposed to go to Cairo, Illinois, and from there telegraph my position. I'm given no other information. I took some staff members with me, and on October 16th, I got to Cairo, Columbus, Kentucky, really, just a little south of Cairo, and I telegraphed that I was there, about to cross the river, and I'm responded with the direction, go to Louisville, Kentucky, to meet a representative of the War Department. Well, this nonplussed me a bit because I'm the commanding officer of the Army of the Tennessee. I've had some success in the war so far, and the only information I am given was go to Louisville and meet a representative of the War Department. I felt I should have a little more information than that. But then again, I'm aware that the wires are not secret. So I entrained again with, and I had Julia and the children with me, was able to bring them, and went to Indianapolis to get to Louisville on the cars. And as we were leaving Indianapolis, my train is stopped abruptly. And I saw some people hurrying through the rail yards to get to my train, and it turned out to be Secretary of War Stanton. And that was the representative of the War Department that I was to meet. And I will have to tell an anecdote. He came into my car, and I had my surgeon, Dr. Guiteau, a British fellow, good doctor, great fellow. And he too has a beard. And Stanton, Secretary Stanton, immediately rushed over to him, grabbed his hand with both of his own, and was pumping his hand and saying, "General Grant, it's so good to meet you. I'd know you anywhere. Yes, sir, it's so good to meet you." And Sergeant Guiteau is like a pump handle. His hand's going up and down. And he's looking over at me, and I was leaning on a cabinet, a chest on the other side of the car, and just greatly enjoying this. And when Stanton finally stopped talking and pumping, Sergeant Guiteau, Dr. Guiteau said, "I'm not Grant. He's Grant." And Stanton had, I credit the man, he had just a moment of, "Oh no," on his face. And then he rushed over to me and grabbed my hand with both of his and was pumping my hand and said, "General Grant, I'd know you anywhere. Yes, sir, I'd know you anywhere." Never lost a beat. And I realized what a good attorney he must have been. But we sat down as the train began moving and began to talk in earnest. And not too long before Secretary Stanton reached in his breast pocket of his coat and pulled out 2 envelopes, and he held them up, and he said, "Both of these orders are for you. You must choose one." Now, they are both identical in that they make you the commanding officer of the new military division of the Mississippi, which encompasses everything from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River to the Gulf. In essence, the entire Western Theater, except the southwest portion where Nathaniel Banks has his Army of the Gulf down there. And it makes you commanding officer of all that area. And the difference between them is this one he held up keeps William Rosecrans in command of the Army of the Cumberland. And he held the other one, and he said, "This one relieves Rosecrans and places George Thomas in command." And I said, I reached for that one. I said, "I'll take that one." Well, again, I was a little nonplussed because I am the commanding officer of the Army of the Tennessee. We've taken Vicksburg successfully. I've just been promoted to commanding officer of how many hundreds of thousands of men. I can't think right off my head at the moment. And I'm in command of the Western Theater. But I was not permitted to pick my own officer to command the Army of the Cumberland. And I think I should have been allowed to do that. Howsoever, that's all right. George Thomas is a good man, and he will do well, I expect. And the train rolled on. We got to Louisville that night, I think the 19th of October by then, 18th, 19th, and heavy rain, cold, miserable day. And it had been that way in Indianapolis, and Secretary Stanton had severe asthma, caught a cold, and he said, I think it's going to be the death of me. Maybe it will. And then we went into the Galt House there in Louisville, met again during the day. Now, that night, I've got relatives in Louisville. Julia has relatives in Louisville. Her aunt lives there, her mother's youngest sister. And I love the theater. So we went to the theater for an evening, an excursion out. Again, it's drizzly, rainy, and cold. Well, when we got back to the hotel, apparently Secretary Stanton, who'd gotten some disturbing news, deputized everybody in the hotel and up and down the street, because as we're coming back out of the theater in the carriage, getting out of the hotel, everybody was asking me, are you General Grant? Yes, I am. Then you're to report to Secretary Stanton immediately. Well, it's after midnight by this time, so I went to his room. He's in his nightshirt and slippers and a nightcap and pacing frantically. I mean, frantically back and forth. And what had happened is Charles A. Dana, brother of the Secretary of War, Assistant Secretary of War, rather, his brother is the author, had sent a telegram from Chattanooga, because he'd been sent to Chattanooga. And he said that Rosecrans, who by now has been bottled up in Chattanooga for nearly a month, this is October the 19th, and he's been there since September the 20th, with very little supplies getting in, no medical supplies of any kind. They've eaten everything they can eat in the area. They've burned all of the wood in Chattanooga. All the buildings are being torn down. They're even having to send pioneers north on the Tennessee River to cut trees a couple of 3 miles or further up north of Chattanooga to float them down the river for them to retrieve out of the river, and the men burn them for campfires and for warmth. They were in desperate straits. Some men were nearly naked because their uniforms are wearing out. They don't have any heavy winter clothing. And Dana sent a telegram to Secretary Stanton and said, Rosecrans is about to surrender or retreat. Well, either one would be devastating. That's losing an entire army of some 35,000 men by now. And it was a defeat that the president could not stand politically here in September of 63. He can't stand that kind of a loss. So Secretary Stanton told me, you must go to Chattanooga immediately. And then I immediately telegraphed Rosecrans, telling him that I was in command of the Division of the Mississippi. He'd been relieved of command, and telegrammed to George Thomas, and said, you are in command, and hold on, I'm on the way. I've ordered for fresh food, vegetables to be sent to you. I'm contacting Admiral Porter to send food to Bridgeport, Alabama, to be sent up north through Stevenson, Alabama, and through over Walden's Ridge, 60 miles of razorback rock and reel to get the food to the men. And I noted that Thomas immediately telegraphed back. He said, we will hold the town until we starve. I thought that was a little stark, maybe perhaps dramatic, even for Thomas, but that's thought no more of it. I entrained the next morning on the 20th got to Nashville, Tennessee, where we stayed at the St. Cloud Hotel. downtown, and I met War Governor, Brigadier General, Tennessee State Guard, Andrew Johnson. And to his surprise, and somewhat to mine, the wartime military governor rank carries a brigadier general rank with it. So he even had a uniform. He didn't wear it. And so we go to the St. Cloud Hotel, and I could tell that this was not his maiden effort in making a speech. And he talked and talked and talked some more. And I was terrified the whole time he was going to ask me to make a speech. He didn't. Now, the rumor is, the myth is that he asked me to make a speech, and I said, I have never made a speech in my life, and I don't intend to learn how now. That's myth. However, he didn't ask me, and we all very happily went to bed because the crowd had had enough too by then. They just wanted to go home. We went to bed. The morning of the 21st, I headed for Bridgeport, Alabama, there on the Tennessee River. I got there, and in the afternoon, Rosecrans called on me. He was on his way out of the theater, the area, and we met and talked at length. And I asked him what he thought I should do. Well, he outlined for me exactly what I had already planned to do. And I only marveled then. I marvel now. Why didn't you do what you're telling me that you think I should do? You could have done everything that you're suggesting to me. I think he seemed a little bit relieved to be heading north. But I think he'll be effectively out of the war after this. Went on up to Jasper, Tennessee, which is not far outside of Chattanooga, small town. And O.O. Howard was there, and the Christian general. He lost an arm a year ago at Fair Oaks, I think it was, in Eastern Theater, but he's on duty. We've got the Medal of Honor. This new Medal of Honor was issued to him, and we met and talked. And I understand he said later that when I met General Grant, I was expecting to find a large man, robust man. He said, I was really surprised to see someone as small as he was. He said, I looked almost frail. I weigh about 150 pounds or so, but we talked for a while. And he did say that he was impressed with me after he got to know me a little bit. General Hooker had sent me an emissary, some colonel, while I was with General Howard. And he said that General Hooker says if you wish to see him, he'll be waiting for you at his headquarters. Well, now, to describe this from the other point of General Howard said that he said, General Grant sat in silence for just a bit and said a little coolly, you may tell General Hooker that I am here in my car, and if he wishes to see me, I will be here. And the colonel, you're dismissed. Well, he embarrassingly left. And in just a few minutes, General Hooker came calling. Now, for those who may not be familiar with military protocol, even though General Hooker had been commander of the Army of the Potomac earlier, he was no longer. And he is in something of a little disgrace, but that depends on one's point of view. But I was his commanding officer. And the junior officer does not send for the senior officer if he wishes to come calling on him. So we had, as it turned out, we had a good meeting. And then General Hooker leaves. So I went on up to, I stayed at a little hamlet. I don't even remember the name of it, little 10, 12 miles outside of Jasper. And on the 23rd, the morning of the 23rd, we continued our trek over the rock and rill I mentioned earlier. There were 10,000 carcasses of mules and horses that were dead. The stench was incredible. I cannot describe the stench. Wagons were embedded up to the beds. Horses were stuck in the mud, mules that were starved to death. And I began to get a picture of what was going on. in Chattanooga because this was the only supply line for Chattanooga. And I was riding Jack, one of my favorites, and Jack, they were picking me up because remember, I'm still on crutches. Very painful injury to my leg and left side. Well, Jack fell on the left side again and in the mud. But fortunately, it was very painful, but it didn't aggravate any injury. That evening toward dark, we got to Chattanooga and I got to Thomas's headquarters. Now, in the next few hours, while I am dripping wet in front of the fire, all of the officers who could, certainly Thomas's staff, came calling. Thomas was there, and I took reports essentially from all of them, junior to senior. And Thomas and I talked long into the night, and then I began issuing orders. Now, one that stands out in my memory was William Farrar Smith, Baldy Smith. Baldy is not really bald, but we've got so many Smiths with stars on their shoulders that we have to differentiate. So Baldy was an engineer. He had been up in, actually he'd been with Hooker up there in the Eastern Theater. Now he had the temerity to say about President Lincoln that we need a dictator. That's not a diplomatic thing to say if you're an Army general. So William Farrar Smith found himself promptly in Chattanooga, just as Hooker was the hero of Chancellorsville, depending on your point of view. And he has had a fall from grace. Well, Smith described the topography of the area so well that I felt, and this was confirmed when I went out the next day, that I could see the country without having to be there. He was that good. And he proposed putting pontoons across the Tennessee River from Browns Ferry to the west side of the river, the Tennessee, to open a supply line to go around Moccasin Bend, past Chattanooga, down around Moccasin Bend, back up to Browns Ferry and across, because there was already a bridge between Chattanooga and Moccasin Bend. They were going to build yet another. I was enamored of the plan and wanted to see the terrain. The next morning on the 24th, we went out, spent the day looking around and looking and talking. And I should like to tell you that what astonished me was the lines across the creeks there, Lookout Creek, Chattanooga Creek, Chickamauga Creek, all the creeks there. They're narrow, as creeks are, and the pickets were very close, actually within almost talking to one another. And even though a group of federal officers, obviously officers high rank, the Confederates never so much as raised their rifles. No, they took notice of us only to take notice of us, and then went back about their business. There was a fraternal feeling there that it turns out they felt like that we were their captives and they weren't having to feed us, and that we were going to ultimately surrender. Well, they didn't know who I was, and didn't make any difference who I was, and I didn't care they didn't know who I was. But I gave some thought all that day, and then I ordered that we would follow Smith's plan about establishing what was called the Cracker Line. Now, briefly, without getting into who did what on the ground with so much detail, what Smith had planned to do was to take about 1,500, 1,800, it turned out it was 1,500, and put them in 60 boats that they had built. He had secured an engine of some sort there in Chattanooga, and they were operating a lumber mill. They built about 60 boats, and to let them float with the current, no motivation at all, just no power, to float down the Tennessee River past the Confederate Army and then with the current of the Tennessee to flow down past the Moccasin Bend and then back up to Browns Ferry. And then they would jump out of the boats and at opposite Browns Ferry, grab the pickets and establish a bridgehead. And as they're doing that, we've got General Hazen. Hazen took the men in the boats around Moccasin Bend. And as he's doing that, Smith moves down with another 3,000 men down the peninsula at Moccasin Bend. They set a bonfire, which tells Hazen, this is where you go to shore. Hazen goes to shore. So you got Smith on Moccasin Bend itself. Hazen takes the pickets, swept them up, the rest surrendered. And this is about 5 o'clock in the morning. By 7 o'clock, they've secured the area. They're building the bridge, and by 10 o'clock, the supplies are moving from the west side of the river across the Tennessee into Moccasin Bend, back into Chattanooga. So we've got the supply line secured, and the troops immediately started calling it the Cracker Line. Well, that night, into the 28th and 29th, there was a feeble attempt by Longstreet to come back in at Wauhatchie, Tennessee, just a little distance away from Browns Ferry, and try to retake the land. It was one of the rare night fights. It didn't start till around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Pretty sharp fight there for a while, but they ultimately fell back and relinquished the area, and we were firmly in control of the Cracker Line. So by the 28th, we're resupplying the troops and getting food and clothing to them and medical supplies. They had eaten everything they could eat, as I said earlier, but they didn't have any medical supplies, and they were really in desperate need of that. So we began then to plan what we're going to do. Well, a month or so goes by. I get Hooker. Now, Hooker is sent down with about 20,000 men. Hooker's, as I said, is fallen from grace. And he brings 20,000 or so troops down. And I stopped him outside of Chattanooga, several miles away. I said, don't come in, because we don't have enough food to feed our own animals and men as we'll bring it in. Keep your troops and animals out of Chattanooga for the moment. Well, a double blessing with Hooker was that he brought down all the wagons that he would to bring a 20,000 man army, and they're all in good shape. He's also got the horses that 20,000 men need, and they're all fat and healthy. They're not bone and tailed. They're healthy animals. They were able to get into hauling the supplies over the Cracker Line, because it is about 25 miles long. Go from Bridgeport, Alabama, up to Kelly's Ford, and then you train them in wagon train into Chattanooga. And all of this is undercover from Confederates, because they can't see what we're doing, because they're positioned on the Raccoon Mountain and Lookout Mountain. So we begin to move the supplies, and Hooker is waiting for orders. Well, by the time, let me go to November the 23rd. I got word because I'm wondering, this is key. I'm wondering, how are we going to get to Missionary Ridge? Because you must try to envision going north and south. On the east side of Chattanooga is Missionary Ridge, about 7-8 miles long, perhaps a little longer, 500 to 800 feet high. On the west side of Chattanooga is Lookout Mountain. I think it's 1,800 feet high at the crest, very imposing. Well, Bragg has the Army of Tennessee, not the Tennessee, Army of Tennessee, all along Missionary Ridge. He's also got troops on the west side of Chattanooga up on Lookout Mountain. Now, that was something of a paper tiger, because it was imposing and threatening to have troops up there, but they really weren't any good. It looked good, but it effected nothing, to no effect. Well, on the 22nd of November, I got word that from Confederate deserters who'd had enough, apparently, they said that Bragg is evacuating to go up to Knoxville and support Longstreet. Longstreet and Bragg couldn't abide each other. They loathed each other. But on November, I think the 3rd, a couple of weeks before, they were up on Lookout Mountain, the very spot where Hooker ultimately was standing 3 weeks later. And Longstreet said, they're going to come here. And Bragg apparently ignored him, but Longstreet adamantly said, they're going to come here. Well, Bragg gets rid of Longstreet and sends him and his 15,000 troops up 100 miles or so north to Knoxville to try to dislodge Burnside, who's up there. Well, Bragg kind of cut off his nose to spite his face there because much of his cavalry went with Longstreet. So he didn't have any eyes or ears. And he also lost 15,000 men that he badly needed later. But I got word that he was evacuating, Bragg was, to go up north and support Longstreet and take Knoxville, and then go north in another perhaps heartland tour campaign. And I said, well, we've got to do something about that. Well, the next morning, 14,000, we had Thomas go out on the plain there that's in front of Chattanooga and Missionary Ridge, and they were drilling of sorts. And at the proper moment, they charged Orchard Knob, which is about 100 feet in height. And there were 626 Confederates on Orchard Knob. Well, they were overrun. And we've got Orchard Knob. Now, we found out Bragg was not evacuating to support Longstreet, but I had Orchard Knob. So now I'm on a 100-foot promontory. That's a pretty good hill there. And I'm able to look to my left as I'm looking south. To my left is Missionary Ridge with Bragg, and to my right is Lookout Mountain. I wanted Hooker to do a demonstration, really, on Lookout Mountain. Just do a demonstration. So early on the morning of the 24th, Bragg starts to move on Lookout Mountain. Takes a couple of different approaches there to go to Lookout, and was very successful. But also, Hooker, remember, he wants to rebuild a reputation. He's still stung from Chancellorsville, and he's no longer in command of the AOP, Army of the Potomac. And he pushed on. I think it's a combination of his enthusiasm and his troopers' enthusiasm. But they fought up Lookout Mountain, up close to Craven House, what they call the bench or the shelf there, a level area. It turned out, as I said, a paper tiger, because they couldn't depress the guns enough to fire down on the Federals attacking. And by 2 o'clock or so, the clouds blew away, and our troops, I as well, could look up on Lookout Mountain. It's about, I think, 1,800 feet high. Quite the promontory there overlooking Moccasin Bend. And we could see Federal troops pursuing the butternut gray. We could see Federal flags flying in the wind, and a mighty cheer went up. And I think that's a good word. A mighty cheer went up from our men, because they still remember Chickamauga. And then the clouds and the fog and the rain settled back in, and the journalists started calling it the battle above the clouds. I think that is a bit romantic, some poetry there, but we had secured Lookout Mountain by 2 o'clock or so on the 24th. Now, Carter Stevenson, as I recall, was in command. They decided that it was untenable to hold it. He began falling back down Lookout Mountain, which is some several miles down to the foot of it, the spine as it goes down, and to go to the east and cross Chickamauga Creek, I think, and then go to Missionary Ridge to support Bragg's southern end. His left, as he is facing my right. Now, the 24th, while Hooker is doing what he's doing on Lookout Mountain, I've got Sherman who has arrived. Not all of his men's with him yet, but he's finally arrived. He's got some 20,000. And I put him to my left, the north end of Missionary Ridge, where it ends. So he's getting in place on the 24th, some fighting, but he gets in place on the 24th to make the assault the next day. So I've got Hooker's men go down Lookout Mountain. So he gets in place, or he's to attack the southern end, the Confederate left. I've got Sherman, who's going to attack the north end. And I've got Thomas and the Army of the Cumberland there in the middle. Now, I have some serious thoughts, reservations about having Thomas attack with the Army of the Cumberland, because I have grave doubts as to whether they'll fight. I'm worried that they have been whooped mentally. They're good men. They have done well in the past. They're well supplied. They're well fed, and they're ready for a fight. Now, they're saying, but I think there's a mentality perhaps there that they're not going to fight. Now, as I am facing Missionary Ridge and I'm sitting my horse on Orchard Knob, Thomas takes about 24,000, as I recall, men onto the plain there at Missionary Ridge. Hooker is down to my right, and I'm expecting him to hit Bragg on his left end. I'm expecting Sherman to hit Bragg on his right end. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. Sherman, we had bad information in maps, and Sherman gets on a place that they call Billy Goat Hill. Well, there's an abyss there, a drop, and I think a railroad cut between Billy Goat Hill and the northern tip of Missionary Ridge, and a lot of heavy forest and wooded area between. On top of that, on top of Missionary Ridge is Patrick Claiborne, who is no mean foe to fight. He's not to be dismissed. And so he's resisting Sherman. Now, I want Sherman to take that north end and roll Bragg down the Missionary Ridge, while I've got Hooker on the south end distracting Bragg and hopefully going up the north end. And I've got the Army of the Cumberland in the center. So the Army of the Tennessee with Sherman's north, Army of the Potomac, so to speak, with Hooker is south, and the Army of the Cumberland's in the middle. And I'm sitting Orchard Knob, sitting my horse with Gordon Granger and George Thomas and other officers. And I see that Sherman is not making any progress. In fact, it took Sherman all that day to get across and engage. Hooker is not engaging because, those rascal Rebs, as they went back down Lookout Mountain, they burned all the bridges. So when Hooker gets down there, he's got to rebuild makeshift bridges to get his men across the creeks. So he's not being successful. Sherman's not being successful. So I have no choice but to turn to Thomas and cut them loose to attack. Well, they did a masterful drill and moving out, and the Confederates that we captured say, we thought those Yankees were doing a show and tell for us, a demonstration. It was magnificent to see more than 20,000 men in those new uniforms drilling and marching and drums and bugles, and suddenly they charged at the double quick. And just like the day before on Orchard Knob, they'd done the same thing with 14,000 men with the drilling, and they rushed the Rebs. They had time to get off one volley and overwhelmed them. The same thing the next day, they're doing this, and suddenly they rush. And their orders were take the initial row of rifle pits, because there were 3 rows of rifle pits up Missionary Ridge. Take the first ones and hold. Well, as they're running across that plain and charging the Rebs, they're yelling Chickamauga, Chickamauga, Chickamauga. and they overran the first row of rifle pits, just brushed them aside. And then they kept on going, charging up to the second tier. And I asked Thomas, who ordered that charge? I demanded, who ordered that charge? And Thomas turned and looked at me and said, well, I certainly didn't. I've been sitting here next to you all day. And I sent messengers, stop that charge, hold your position. And then they surged up to the next tier of rifle pits. I sent more messengers, stop that movement and hold. And then they surged up and overwhelmed Bragg at the top of the hill, and Bragg beat a hasty retreat. Then I had to send messengers, belay the orders, don't follow the order, disregard the orders, not to go further. And by the end of the day, on November the 25th of 1863, we were in possession of Missionary Ridge the day before, Lookout Mountain the day before, Orchard Knob, and Chattanooga was secure. Bragg fell back. We pursued Ringgold, Georgia. 2 days later, I think, we had a pretty stiff fight at Ringgold and ascertained that Bragg was falling back, not organizing for a counterattack. And that set up the tactics for Sherman to go into Atlanta later. And it wasn't long before I heard from Washington. I'd heard about the president resurrecting the rank of lieutenant general, and I had heard that I was the one he had in mind. But at the moment, at the end of the day on November the 25th of 63, when we've secured Missionary Ridge and therefore Chattanooga and all that it held for us now and for the future, I think I'll bring my comments to a close and pick up next with, after Chattanooga, what happened?
General Grant, I appreciate the opportunity to hear your thoughts on this. One thing I'll invite you to think about maybe in advance of our next conversation is just what this battle ends up meaning to you. It's a pretty significant battle. So
Okay.
With that, I'd like to thank General Grant for being with us as well. I'd like to thank my friend Curt Fields for being with us today. Been a delightful opportunity to chat. I'm Chris Mackowski for the Emerging Civil War podcast. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.